I'm Summer Morris, CPA, ex-corporate accounting girl and health coach turned CEO of a multi-six-figure business while helping others build financial security, healthier habits, and a better quality of life. It wasn't that long ago I lacked the confidence, the right plan, and time to focus on growing my small but mighty business, while also having time for healthy activities I wanted to pursue away from my desk. Fast forward past many failures and lessons learned, and you'll see the healthier business and lifestyle I have today. One that changes lives while giving me more freedom than I ever thought possible. I created the Fit to Endure podcast to share simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies to help you do the same. So if you're looking to feel better, live a healthier life without blowing your budget, start a side hustle, or train for your next race, this show will help you make an impact and achieve your goals without creating the overwhelm and burnout that makes you want to quit. You ready? Let's get started. Hey friends, welcome back to the Fit to Endure podcast. I'm glad you're here. Today's episode is one you won't want to miss. We'll be diving into how you can protect yourself from identity theft and banking fraud, and what steps you can take if you become a victim. I also have a special handout that includes a checklist on what to do if you or someone you love becomes an identity theft victim. You can find the show notes and access to the downloadable handout at summermorris.com/21. That's summermorris.com/ and the number 21. We'll dive into a real life scenario to set the stage and understand how cunning fraudsters can be. To protect the innocent, all names have been changed. Now, I understand how much embarrassment and shame something like this can bring up for somebody who finds themselves a victim, and the whole, how did I let this happen to me scenario? So please know, if this happens to you or someone you care for, have grace and the reminder that we're all human, that we make mistakes. Go easy on the person who was the victim. And if you're the victim and you find somebody you're sharing your situation with challenging you on, how could you do this? I can't believe you did this. Again, they're human too, and they might be feeling a bit of fear and panic as well. For this scenario, I have changed the names to Dan as the victim, and I'll be using the names Letitia and Jimmy as the fraudsters. Meet Dan, who recently experienced a heart-wrenching encounter with identity theft and banking fraud. Imagine receiving a call from Letitia, who claims to be from Wells Fargo. Dan, our victim in this case, has his personal checking, savings, and credit card accounts with Wells Fargo. Letitia asked Dan for his full name and birth date to verify his identity. A reasonable request, right? Then she inquires if he's authorized any recent wire transfers. Concerned, Dan replies no, and Letitia says there's been unusual account activity in his personal checking account. Cue the alarming sound. Our story is just beginning. Letitia transfers Dan to Jimmy, supposedly from Wells Fargo's fraud department. Shortly after, Dan receives a FaceTime call from an email address, virtualverifyme@gmail.com, which is rather strange. However, the person assures him that it's due to internal confidentiality, given that fraudsters could be within the bank, meaning the people trying to steal his money through those unauthorized wire transfers could be Wells Fargo employees themselves. Dan is instructed to keep his face visible during the 28-minute video call while Jimmy's screen remains blacked out. Jimmy claims that somebody is impersonating Dan in another state and trying to make unauthorized wire transfers. Surprisingly, Jimmy sends a validation code directly to Dan's phone, just like Wells Fargo has done in the past. While skeptical, Dan continues the process since previous experiences with Wells Fargo's identity verification text codes bolstered the story's credibility. Jimmy guides Dan to move funds between his accounts, including taking out a $2,600 cash advance from his Wells Fargo credit card, the amount that was Dan's remaining available credit on the card, and consolidate everything into a joint checking account he shares with his wife. Dan anxiously performs these actions and is told to wait for Jimmy's second call, which will happen in about 30 to 45 minutes. About an hour later, a second FaceTime video call from the virtualverifyme@gmail.com arrived. Go to the nearest Wells Fargo branch and withdraw the balance in the joint checking account, leaving just a few dollars to keep it open, and then return to your car, Jimmy instructed. Dan was also advised not to tell anyone at the branch why he was withdrawing the money, as Jimmy warned that this could be an inside job involving Wells Fargo employees. "We don't want to tip them off," Jimmy added during the call. Upon returning to his car with the cash in hand, Jimmy walked Dan through the process of manually adding a temporary virtual check card to his iPhone wallet and provided him with the PIN number. For those unfamiliar, the Wallet app is where you can store electronic versions of your credit cards, check cards, concert tickets, race registration tickets, etc. In this electronic wallet, you can keep all the things you'd otherwise carry around in your physical wallet. With all this information in hand, Dan was advised to go to the Wells Fargo ATM he had parked near and use the new virtual card in his virtual wallet to make 2 deposits totaling the full amount of the money he just withdrew from inside the branch. Usually, when Dan makes a deposit at an ATM, he receives a receipt. However, in this case, the screen did not provide the option of retaining a receipt. Dan said he didn't think much of it because he doesn't normally make a deposit using a virtual card, so maybe that's just how the process is. But still nervous about this process, Dan was slightly reassured because he had been a long-standing Wells Fargo customer, and the initial call came from the Wells Fargo phone number saved in his phone. He had previously received security text messages from the same Wells Fargo texting number saved in his iPhone messaging app, and the caller, Jimmy, completed an online transfer of the funds from his personal savings account to his joint checking account. This gave Dan temporary assurance that someone within the bank was handling this. While still on the virtual call with Jimmy, after completing the bank deposits through the ATM, Dan returned to his car and was guided on how to manually remove that temporary digital card from his iPhone wallet. You know, the one that Jimmy just helped him put on. Now he's taken it off. He said it was just temporary to help us move that money so that the perpetrators, the bad guys, couldn't get it. A little time passed while Dan remained on the line. Jimmy came back on the line and said Dan's personal accounts at Wells Fargo had now been closed. Jimmy advised Dan to delete the Wells Fargo app from his iPhone and reinstall it. Jimmy also mentioned that he'd be calling back in a couple hours to provide further updates after working more on the investigation. However, Jimmy never called back. Dan tried logging into his online banking. It didn't work. He then tried to register using his social security number and bank account number. Still, the Wells Fargo online banking system indicated that no accounts could be recognized with that information. What? That night, Dan shared with his wife what had happened. He explained that although he felt skeptical about certain aspects, he was instructed not to share the information with anyone, including her, about the call with Wells Fargo, which could tip off someone involved in the fraud. After a full day had passed, much to Dan's resistance, his wife called Wells Fargo. That's when Dan slowly started to learn that what had transpired was likely not a resolution to someone attempting to impersonate him from another state to wire funds from his account. Instead, it was something much more significant. He also learned that Jimmy, or someone working with Jimmy, had established a wire transfer of $3,500 from an online account Dan had at Capital One to Wells Fargo. In the past, Dan had linked a secondary account he had with Capital One, a personal checking account, to his personal Wells Fargo accounts. That way he can freely move money from Capital One to Wells Fargo whenever he wanted. While on the phone with the actual Wells Fargo representative, the one his wife told him not to call, the representative advised him that although he was unable to log into his online banking, all of his accounts were still active. And someone had gone into Wells Fargo's online banking system and initiated a $3,500 transfer from his personal Capital One checking account into his Wells Fargo personal account. Those accounts the Jimmy guy said had been closed. Plus, Dan learned that someone had charged an additional $4,000 cash advance on top of his available balance from his Wells Fargo credit card. Somehow, they were able to increase his credit card balance by $4,000 and withdraw that money from his credit card account. As of the time of this recording, Dan is now working directly with the actual Wells Fargo fraud department, trying to figure out what's next. Dan does not yet know what he is liable for and what will be reversed, and experiencing all the anxiety-inducing feelings of embarrassment and shame that come from being the victim of identity theft and banking fraud. Now, as he sunk into his chair during our conversation, Dan said to me, I can't believe I fell for this. It felt so real because they contacted me via the phone and text from the numbers I had communicated with Wells Fargo with in the past. Too much time had passed, and I didn't want to believe it, but the realization set in. I've been defrauded of a lot of money I can't afford to lose. Dan is now navigating the fallout of this traumatic experience, and I'll update you on a future podcast episode once I hear back from Dan. As mentioned earlier, I have an identity theft checklist to share with you that you can download at summermorris.com/21. I'll also work with my assistant to build out some show notes for the information I shared in today's podcast, so you can download it and forward it on to people that you want to help better protect from identity theft and banking fraud. With my background as a certified public accountant and having worked for several years in financial institutions such as online brokerages, credit unions, and banks, serving in roles from internal auditor to senior accountant overseeing the complete wire transfer process, there were areas of Dan's experience that were genuine red flags to me. And it made complete sense why they would not be red flags to Dan, because he didn't share the same background that I had regarding working with banks and having been trained on how to identify fraud in a banking setting. So if you decide to skip the show notes and the download completely, I'm going to share with you some ways you can protect yourself from such a sophisticated scam after this brief commercial break. Are you an entrepreneur working nonstop in survival mode, trying to figure out how to increase sales and make more money? Is your unpredictable cash flow stressing you out? Do you avoid looking at your bills or bank balances because you feel overwhelmed by your money situation? Are you unsure how much to pay yourself, so you avoid doing it all together and instead use your business bank accounts for personal purchases? Well, imagine instead if you can look at your bank account balance with greater confidence. Pay yourself regularly every single month. What if you had a system in place, an easy system, for every dollar that came in? Some for you, some for expenses, and some set aside for the tax bill. Imagine if paying taxes was more of an inconvenience than a where am I going to find the money panic. And what if you had a proven method for eliminating debt? You can learn the simple steps to building your profit and cash flow roadmap in my group coaching program. It's called Steady Profits and Consistent Cash Flow. It's a one-day live interactive workshop in Zoom with 2 separate 2-hour sessions for a total of 4 hours. It's recorded for later viewing, so if you're not able to attend live or just want to rewatch it, I like to say it's better than Netflix. You can learn more at summermorris.com/profits. That's summermorris.com/PROFITS. I'll see you inside. Welcome back. So how do we protect ourselves from such a sophisticated scam? Here are some critical steps you can take. 1. Verify, verify, verify. If someone calls claiming to be from your bank or credit card company, hang up and call the official customer number. Do not give out your personal information over an incoming call or email. Hang up and call them back even if your phone shows they're calling you from the correct number. Hang up and call them back, okay? Number 2, beware of unusual communication. Banks seldom ask you to verify account details such as sensitive activities via email or FaceTime, especially from generic email addresses. Always be suspicious. 3, scrutinize email addresses and caller IDs. Authentic banks use official email domains, not generic ones like Gmail. Number 4, double check unusual requests. Question this rigorously if you're asked to transfer funds, close accounts, or activate new cards under unusual circumstances. Now, add in a little bit more to this. When I asked Dan, why didn't you mention this to your wife or your friends or whatever? And he said, well, because they told me not to tell anybody because of the potential for fraud elsewhere. But what I mentioned to Dan during my trainings in the past is I've learned that when it comes to fraud or a type of abuse, the perpetrator wants to isolate the victim as much as possible. Because if, for example, if Dan had gone through the process of asking other people to like, hey, does this make sense? There's a great likelihood they'd say, it sounds like you could be the victim of fraud right now. You need to go do something else. But instead, Dan kept it to himself exactly how the perpetrator told him to, and he didn't have an opportunity to step back and reflect like, hey, does this make sense? And get that second opinion. So number 4, double check unusual requests and maybe add on to that, get a second opinion, share it with someone that you trust. Does it make sense to them too? Number 5, guard your personal information. Do not share your PIN number, password, or security codes if asked out of context of your usual banking operations. Number 6, two-factor authentication. Ensure your accounts use 2 factors for an added layer of security. Number 7, monitor your accounts. Regularly check your account statements and online banking for any suspicious activity. Number 8, educate yourself and your family. Make sure everyone in your household knows the signs of potential fraud. Now, if you happen to become a victim, here are some immediate steps. 1, call your bank or financial institution immediately. Report the fraud using the official customer service number on the back of your card or on your statements. Request to freeze or close the affected accounts. 2, file a police report. Seriously, file one. Having a police report can be useful for further investigations and insurance claims. 3, notify your credit bureaus. Place a fraud alert on your credit report and consider a credit freeze to prevent further damage. 4, document everything. Record all correspondence, keep copies of emails, and log dates and times for your actions. In the case of Dan, I had him screenshot the text log he received from the account number verifications, as well as the phone call log, and the screenshot of the virtual verifyme@gmail.com FaceTime video call that was in the call log that also included the date and time of those incoming calls and the length of time. Number 5, change your passwords and security questions. Update all banking passwords, PINs, and security questions to bolster your security. 6, stay vigilant. Monitor your credit report and accounts closely for any further unusual activity. While Dan's experience is unfortunate, it serves as a stern reminder of the importance of vigilance and skepticism regarding unexpected communication regarding our finances. That wraps up today's Protect Your Wallet episode on the Fit to Endure podcast. Remember to stay informed and cautious. With the right knowledge and swift action, you can prevent identity theft and banking fraud. Now, if you found this episode helpful, don't forget to share it with friends and family, the young ones too. Spreading awareness might prevent someone from becoming the next victim. Until next time, stay safe and secure. By the way, do you have a question or topic you would like me to answer or share on an upcoming podcast episode? If so, email it to me at podcast@summermorris.com. That's podcast@summermorris.com. Thank you for tuning in, and namaste.